Welcome to Write to Publish, your go-to podcast for all things writing and publishing. I'm Karen Stanley, a 14 times published author and the founder of Mabel and Stanley Publishing. Join me as I share a multitude of tips and insights drawn from my own writing and publishing journey. We'll be hearing from some inspirational authors too, who will share their writing experiences and top tips for success. Each week, we'll learn about an aspect of writing, from composition to genre and from publishing to marketing. Listen in as we learn and chat about all things writing and publishing, and let's get you on the right path. Hello and welcome again to this episode of Write to Publish. Hopefully, lots of writing tips and tricks and publishing advice to help you on your way. And this week, I wanted to talk to you about the power of community, the power of a writer's community, and why writing sprints work. So some interesting little topics for conversation for you today. One of the things that you will probably know by now is how lonely it is to be a writer. By definition, you don't generally tend to write in a crowded room or at parties, do you? Generally, sorry if I can even speak, you generally tend to write at a desk on your own, usually surrounded by your drink of choice, whether that be coffee or maybe a glass of wine if you're writing in the evening. Usually snacks are involved, and you sit on your derriere on your own in your very quiet space, beavering away, writing. And if you're anything like me, I can't actually write with too much distraction. I'm a very distracted person anyway, bordering on sort of hyperactive, I would say, very much a creative brain, can't really do things in a busy or a noisy room without getting massively distracted. So for me, I have to sit in silence, really. I have to have the door shut. I can't have too much going on around me. I certainly can't have any noise on. I can't have the radio on. You know, some people like to write with the radio on. Can't think of anything worse because I just can't concentrate. So for me, very, very, very solitary process, unless you count my dog who comes in to snore on the floor sometimes. But it's a very solitary process. And because of that, it's quite a lonely process by definition. So there are times when you might emerge from a particular writing kind of episode, if we say, if you've been writing for a few hours, and you'll come out almost like you're emerging from some sort of chrysalis. You feel a bit bleary-eyed, you feel a bit disorientated. If you're anything like me, you get really engrossed in your writing, you get really caught up in your characters, in your storyline, in your setting, and your planning. You can really lose yourself in your story. And when you come out of that, it's almost like you're being born for the first time. You know, it's quite disorientating, and again, it's really, really lonely. And what happens there is you become more and more solitary in your writing process. Therefore, also, sometimes it's difficult to be objective about what you're writing. It's difficult to get that bird's eye view if it's only just you looking at what you've written and looking at what you've planned and, you know, looking at what you've kind of got to say. So that itself can be a really lonely process. And for me, I love creative discussions. I love creative discussions. Very much a talker. My family and friends will tell you that for sure. You know, I'm someone who likes to verbalize. I'm someone who likes to vocalize. And for me, the absolute best way to, to kind of inspire me, to fuel my creativity, to kickstart me when I'm maybe finding it difficult to get my writing in flow, when I'm finding it difficult to get the ideas come in, when I'm just finding it difficult to make it work. You know, creative discussion is so powerful. And the thing about creative discussion is I can have a creative discussion with my husband, and God bless him, he's great. You know, sometimes there's been stories I've come down to him and said, what do you think about this? And I think he'd be saying, well, you know, I think it'd be better if she was pregnant, or if he'd left his wife, or, you know, they'd got together over in a foreign country or something like that. You know, he's great at giving me ideas. He's great at being a critical friend and telling me when he thinks things don't work, etc., or when he doesn't think things ring true. But the point is, he's not a writer. And sometimes that's really useful to have a completely objective point of view, someone who's really not in the loop, not in your field, to say, this is what I think, that you can, you know, bet your bottom dollar then that really is an objective point of view. But for people who aren't writers, it's difficult to have writing discussions. The same as, you know, if you were trying to have a medical discussion with a doctor, you'd feel a bit left out, or you might get a bit bored by certain things that they're saying. So, it stands to reason that actually the best people to have writing discussions with are other writers, because they'll understand your frustrations, they'll get where you're coming from. I've just had my writers group for my Writer Passage Growth Academy this evening. I'm recording this podcast episode of an evening. Just had my Writer Passage Growth Academy meeting, and we get together on Zoom and we talk about where we are in our novels or our stories or our books at this point. And we've got people from all genres, a diverse range of writers, and we talk about where we are, where we're going. We look back at targets that we might have set the last time we met. So saying, well, you said you were going to write 2,000 words and you were going to move your story along in this way, and have you managed to achieve that? And then we might talk about, well, no, I didn't actually achieve that. So what did you get stuck on? Well, I don't really know how to develop this character, or I don't really know what I'm going to do with this bit of the story, or this part of the story isn't quite ringing true for me. I don't really know where to go with it next. Writers are brilliant for then going, well, do you know what? Have you thought about making your character do this? Or this really needs to happen at midnight, because to me, that's kind of a spooky, magical, mystical, kind of atmospheric part in the story. So you can't really have your character go there in broad daylight because it's a little bit too bright and light. All of those creative discussions are going to be best had with other writers who are going to say, I get you. I know where you're coming from. I've been there myself. I've had those exact same struggles. And also, as a writer, hearing about other people's planning and plotting and writing woes, or hearing about other people's stories, can really give you inspiration as well. Listening to how someone might have plotted their story arc, or the trajectory of their story, or how they're using settings to move their characters forward, or how their characters will be driving their plot forward, or how they're adding intrigue or imagery. Those kinds of discussions are really exciting. They're really inspiring. They're really motivating. And those creative discussions, writing discussions, are best had with other writers. So going back to the title of this podcast today, why is community important? It's important for all of those reasons. It's important to kind of beat the loneliness that is felt by such a sedentary and static kind of profession or occupation or vocation or whatever you want to call it. It's important to spark that creativity. It's important to connect with people who are on your wavelength. In any line of business, it's great to network. It's great to connect, and connecting with people who can empathize, who can relate to your current situation is hugely empowering. It's hugely powerful. So having those discussions, having that network opportunity, having that sense of community is brilliant. It's brilliant to move your writing forward. It's brilliant to help you with things like writer's block, or when you're having kind of issues with creativity. It's brilliant to discuss your story, and just even sometimes just me saying it aloud to some poor willing soul who's ready to listen helps. I almost find the answers myself just by verbalizing. Okay. So all of those things can be fueled, helped, inspired, and moved forward by having a community. And also the learning that you can get from a community. When I started my writing journey 12 years ago now, I had no idea about publishing, for example, and I got so much really shocking advice that either wasn't true, or it wasn't delivered with integrity, or it was delivered at a huge financial and sometimes an emotional cost. And speaking to other writers, I've learned so much, because every writer's journey is different. Beware the people who tell you should be doing it a certain way. Tell them to bog right off. You shouldn't be doing it a certain way. You should be doing it the way that works for you. Of course, it's important to do your due diligence and do your research. It's important to take advice, but take advice from people who've walked the walk and aren't just talking the talk. I learned so much from other writers who shared with me what had worked for them, what hadn't worked for them, what they found to be a complete pain in the derriere, what actually moved their career or their vocation or their hobby even, or their pleasure forward. What was it that's worked for them? And I only really got that information from other writers. I didn't get it from people in the publishing industry, because sometimes, not always, but they've got an agenda. I didn't get it from people who aren't in the writing industry because they're not living it, they're not breathing it, no, they're not doing it. I got it from other writers. And you might imagine, quite rightly, this is not rocket science. If you network, if you collaborate with like-minded people who get you, who get where you're coming from, who are facing the same challenges and reveling in the same successes that you might be, that's hugely inspiring and hugely helpful. So I can't really stress to you enough how important that community is. And for those times when you feel really blooming lonely and frustrated and like you're banging your head on a brick wall and like you're not moving further forward, you're getting stuck, those people will pick you up, they'll G you up, they'll be excited for your success, they'll be sad when you're having a troubled time, they'll offer advice, they'll offer support. So, those finding your tribe is really important, I think, in any walk of life, but none more so than in writing. It's just hugely powerful. And the other thing I wanted to talk to you about is writing sprints. I've been reading Stephen King's On Writing recently, and he talks about his writing journey, and he gives a few sort of do's and don'ts for good writing. Some things I agree with him, some things jury's out for me. I mean, who am I to argue with someone who's a multi-million best-selling author? But again, we're not all going to agree with each other, and what will be one path for one may not be one path for the other, but it's certainly worth a read. It's called On Writing by Stephen King, and he gives lots of valuable advice. And one of the things he says is that, well, this was slightly controversial in my writing group tonight we talked about. He says that a book shouldn't take longer than 3 months. Now, for someone who writes for a living, that's probably more achievable than for someone who has a full-time job and writes for pleasure, or someone who maybe does half and half in their life. I have to say, I wrote my first book in 3 months. However, it was more of a novella than a novel, and that was maybe about 45,000 words. It is doable, and I wrote every weekend. I did have a full-time job, so it is doable. But obviously, if you're writing, a huge historical fiction where you've got to do a lot of research and stuff like that, I think that's probably a little bit unrealistic, particularly if you're not a writer full-time, it isn't your job. But what he was saying by that was, if you let your story drag on too much, and for him, and again, this is his view, but for him specifically, he really likes to get into the characters. He really likes to eat, breathe, sleep his characters. And I have to be honest, when I'm writing a book, I start to think those characters are real. And we'll do podcast episodes and more webinars on character development. But I go to bed dreaming about my characters, not in a weird way, but in a way that I think they're real people because they've become real in my imagined mind and in my stories. I think what Stephen King was trying to say there was, if you leave it for a real length of time, so you've got months in between one writing sprint and another, you almost start to lose touch with those characters. You almost start to forget about them. You will start to forget where you are in the story. You sort of lose your flow. You lose your momentum. So what he's saying is, it's important to maintain that momentum. So, that 3 months might not be doable for everybody. That's what he's saying. But I kind of get where he was coming from about keeping that momentum, keeping that flow, keeping that creative process going. And I know when I'm writing a book, if I have 2 or 3 weeks off, it does take me a lot longer to get back in than if I'm into a bit of a rhythm. And the story then, again, one of the ladies in my group tonight said, once she sort of sat down and started writing, the story almost started to unfold by herself because she had a really good idea and clarity about where she wanted her story to go. So back to writing sprints. For those of you who maybe haven't taken part in a writing sprint or are not quite familiar with what they are, a writing sprint is exactly what it says. You basically do a sprint of writing. So you write for a designated amount of time. Now that might be 2 hours, it might be a day, it might be a morning, it might be an afternoon, but it's a period of concentrating writing where you sit down and you write. And the thing about writing sprints are that they're usually done with a group of other writers. Okay. Now, one of the things I teach with my writing coaching, particularly with my business writers and all of that, is about assessing your writing speed. And again, we'll talk more in other episodes about writing speed and writing timetables. But I talk to people about assessing their writing speed understanding how long the book's going to take them. For example, if it takes you an hour to write 1,000 words and you're going to write 30,000 words, you know roughly that's 30 hours, stands to reason. And then you can begin to set your timetable based around that amount of words. So you know, right, I've only got an hour a week. I can't possibly commit any more. That's going to take me 30 weeks. Not ideal, but you get what I'm saying. So understanding how long it takes you to write and your deadline and your timetable will really help you to stay on track and will help you to avoid what Stephen King is suggesting might happen if you allow your project to drift on too far. Okay, so the point about a writing sprint is you show up with a group of other people and you write for that designated amount of time. You've already hopefully got your writing speed in your mind. You've already got your timetable. You already know how many hours you need to do to finish this. You hopefully have set some kind of deadline to say, well, I'd like to have this book published in June, for example, or I want to have this first draft finished in 3 months' time. But then people still stumble a little bit because life gets in the way. You know, the dog will be sick on the carpet one day when you were just about to sit down to write, and then somebody calls at the door and your writing time goes, and suddenly you thought, oh, I'll get distracted by that, and your writing doesn't happen. So the thing about writing, like anything, you have to set your intention and you have to show up. You know, if you're writing the book, you've got to do the work. You can't, you know, there's no way, unless you're, you know, someone famous and you've got a ghostwriter, and presumably you're writing for pleasure if you're listening to this, you've got to show up, you've got to do the work. So by setting an intention, and not just I'm going to try and write a bit this week. You know, you don't say to your boss, oh, I had intended to come into work, but the dog was sick on the carpet and someone rang on the doorbell and I couldn't come in. You've set your intention to get to work at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, and by hook or by crook, you will show up. Otherwise, you don't get paid, you know, and you're likely to lose your job. So you set your intention and you set that actual time, date, event in your diary. So it becomes an event. It becomes an appointment. And that's the point of writing sprints. You meet collectively with other writers at a designated time. So in my Mabel and Stanley writing and publishing community, we're going to be having writing sprints every Tuesday. They're going to run from 9 a.m. to 11 a.m. and also again from 6 p.m. to 8 p.m. The great thing about that is I've got international writers wanting to join in. Somebody in India, they're 5.5 hours ahead of us, so they might be able to join in the morning one because then it'll be tea time for them. So I'm trying to make it work for sort of people in different time zones. But the idea is that you set that appointment. You rock up at 9 o'clock with all the other writers. We meet on Zoom and then it's camera off, mic off, but you know you're there. You've gone to that time. You've physically made that date in your diary. You've physically shown up to that appointment. And then by doing that, you've shut out all of those distractions. Presumably you'll have gone to your writing desk, wherever that might be. It might be a corner of your bedroom. It might be your lap on the sofa. It doesn't matter where it is, but you've gone to your writing space. You've set your appointment. You've told everyone to leave you alone because you're busy for 2 hours. You haven't booked another appointment in your diary that's suddenly going to clash. You're showing up at that time with the full intention of writing with other like-minded people, part of your community, which we talked about how important that is. And then you'll get stuff done. And I've had people actually a lady last week who showed up to one of my writing sprints who's not a writer. She's writing her first business book and isn't finding the process massively easy. But she said, these writing sprints are brilliant because I have to come. And as soon as I come, I've put myself mentally in the place where I know I'm committed to doing that thing. I've got rid of all my distractions. And on both of the last the last writing sprint, she wrote 3,000 words. And the sprint before, she finished a whole chapter. I mean, amazing. And she said, I would not have done that had I not committed to the writing sprint. So I would say to you 2 things that I would strongly advise. Find your tribe, find your writing community. It might be 2 people, it might be 20 people, but find people, like-minded writers, and I would suggest it's probably more than a couple would be great, who you can get together with. You can have creative discussions with them. You can bounce ideas off each other. You can build each other up and support each other in the tough times, and you can celebrate together in the good times. Wonderful. And if you can, get yourself onto some writing sprints. Put that in your diary. Make it an appointment. Make it a reason to show up, to be present, to get it done, get started, and actually commit to the process. Because if you don't, things drift on and on and on, and life just happens. So if you're interested in knowing more about the writing sprints and you'd like to be part of the Mabel and Stanley publishing community, please do get in touch. You can find me on Facebook at Mabel and Stanley Publishing. You can find me on Instagram at Mabel and Stanley Publishing. I'm quite easy to find, or you can send me an email, mabelandstanley@outlook.com. But get in touch. Send me a DM on Facebook if you want to come in, or you can find me Karen Stanley on Facebook. Send me a DM and ask me about it, and come and join our writing sprints on the Patreon community, on the Mabel and Stanley writing and publishing community. Not only do you get the writing sprints, but you get oodles of other stuff as well. You get monthly webinars, you get monthly Q&A sessions, you get challenges, you get the chance to join the academy, which gives you real accountability there, and I start to really hold you accountable to your targets. So you get lots of others and loads of resources, videos, templates, PDFs. There's loads of other stuff on there. But if you do it for no other reason than to join the weekly writing sprints and to feed off that writing community, then it's a great way to get your writing done and to get your project out there. So community and showing up, setting your intention, putting a date in your diary and setting that, almost carving that in a tablet of stone. That's when I'm doing my writing, and nothing's going to stop me. So I hope that's inspired you. I hope that's motivated you to take action. Good luck with your writing projects wherever you are. Please do get in touch with me if you want any questions answered. I'm always happy to help. And thank you for listening to Write to Publish. See you again next time.